You are now listening to Mark's Unexplained World by Mark the Medium, available on Apple Podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Amazon Prime, Podbean and most other podcast platforms. Tonight's episode is about the death smog of Donora. So it's over to you now, Mark, for tonight's misty goings-on.
The Donora smog was an air pollution disaster that occurred in Donora, Pennsylvania on the 27th of October in 1948, which lasted for several days. The smog itself was caused by hydrogen fluoride and sulfur dioxide emissions from the US Steel Donora Zinc Works and its American Steel and Wire plant during an atmospheric temperature inversion. It eventually ended up killing 20 people in the immediate area and caused respiratory problems for another 6,000 of the 14,000 people living in a small mill town on the Monongahela River, which was 42 miles away. And even after 10 years following the incident, mortality rates in Donora were significantly higher than those in other communities nearby. Researchers who have analysed the event have focused the likely blame on pollutants from the zinc plant, whose emissions had killed almost all vegetation within a half-mile radius of the incident. And a Dr. Deborah L. Davis, who was the director of the Centre for Environmental Oncology at the University of Pittsburgh Cancer Institute, has pointed out to autopsy results showing that the fluoride levels of the victims were in the lethal range, with them being as much as 20 times higher than normal levels. Further research was conducted by the American toxicologist Mary Amdur about the effects of the Donora smog, but she was pressured to withdraw any of her findings and publications of her results. However, she refused to be succumbed. 60 years later, the death smog of Donora incident has been described by the New York Times as, and I quote,
"one of the worst air pollution disasters in the nation's history."
Greetings, Unexplainers. Thank you for tuning in once again and listening to this bad weather episode of Mark's Unexplained World. My name is Mark Hughes. I'm a medium, a ufologist, a true crime buff, and a man with a very dark and disturbed sense of humour who lets his strangeness dominate his life because being ordinary can be quite dull at times. But just to give you a better idea of who I am and what I do, every Tuesday, meant to be Tuesday, but I'm late this week, allowing for bank holidays and busy weekends, I do a podcast on the many wide and various subjects that fall under the Unexplained banner. These include ufology, hauntings, disasters, and all sorts of other paranormal phenomena, including true crime, unsolved crime, serial killers, and the occasional missing person that often goes unnoticed. So, if you are listening to this show on YouTube, please give us a review or an opinion of the episode's subject that I can reply to, a thumbs up, and subscribe to my channel. Or, if you are listening on any of the other podcast platforms, again, give us a like and a follow. In this episode, I'm going to tell you about the mist surrounding story involving the death smog of Donora. This week's necessary disclaimer: this story is a tale that sadly involves people dying through misadventure, so may prove upsetting to some. You listen at your own discretion. Also, all opinions and comments are strictly my own, but the facts of the case remain. I also apologise if I pronounce anything incorrectly. My English, although it is my first and only language, has helped me to find out that I have a photographic memory. The problem was, I never had it properly developed. And on that note, I think we should get back to the story. Well, according to Wikipedia, Donora is a borough in Washington County, Pennsylvania in the United States and is approximately 20 miles or 32 kilometres south of Pittsburgh along the Monongahela River with a population as of the 2020 census of 4,558. Donora was incorporated in 1901 and takes its name from a combination of the names of philanthropist and American businessman William Donner and Nora Mellon, who was the wife of the American banker, businessman, industrialist, philanthropist, art collector and politician Andrew W. Mellon. Donora is located in the Mon Valley, and in 1911 it was the third wealthiest borough in the United States. Donora's nickname is the Home of Champions, mainly because of the large number of famous athletes who have called Donora their home, with these athletes including the Baseball Hall of Fame outfielders Stan Musial and Ken Griffey Jr. Agriculture, coal mining, steel making, wire making and other industries were very important to Donora in its early history, but its Rust Belt location has lost most of its industrial capacity. On a quick interesting side note here, the Rust Belt, which was formerly known as the Steel Belt or Factory Belt, is an area of the United States that underwent substantial industrial decline. Between the late 19th century and the late 20th century, the Rust Belt formed the industrial heartland of the country, and its economies were largely based on iron and steel, automobile production, coal mining, and the processing of raw materials. The Rust Belt experienced an industrial decline in the beginning of the 1950s and 60s, with manufacturing peaking as a percentage of US GDP in 1953, and then began to decline incrementally in subsequent years, especially in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Demand for coal declined as industry turned to oil and natural gas, and US steel was undercut by competition from Germany and Japan. So, before we get into the Donora incident itself, let's have a look at exactly what smog is as a whole. Well, according to the BYJU's exam prep website, mainly because I'm still learning things as I go along, and let's be honest, aren't we all, smog is an air pollution that reduces visibility. The word smog itself was coined in the early 20th century and, as you are probably already aware, it is a contraction of the words smoke and fog to refer to smoky fog due to its opacity and odour. The word smog was originally intended to refer to a familiar and serious problem in London in the UK from the 19th century to the mid-20th century that was sometimes known as pea soup fog. This kind of visible smog, air pollution, is composed of nitrogen oxides, sulphur oxides, ozone and smoke, along with other particulates. However, man-made smog is derived from coal combusting emissions, vehicle emissions, industrial emissions, forest and agricultural fires, and photochemical reactions. As well as smoke-killing plants, it is also harmful to the health of humans, especially when it is inhaled, and may be likely to cause the following effects: coughing and sneezing, wheezing, a burning sensation in the eyes and throat, the risk of serious heart disease, the risk of serious lung disease, and it can be particularly dangerous from people suffering from asthma. The causes behind the formation of the smogs are different, which is why they are classified into two different types. Photochemical smog, which is also called the Los Angeles smog and is also the most commonly occurring, and sulphurous smog, which is also known as the London smog. Photochemical smog is created when sunlight reacts with nitrogen oxides and at least one volatile organic compound in the atmosphere, with this kind of smog requiring neither smoke nor a fog, and sulphureous smog, which is the result of a high concentration of sulfur oxides in the atmosphere and is usually caused by the burning of fossil fuels like coal. There is a lot of sciencey bits when it comes to explaining weather phenomena like smog, but I really don't want to send you to sleep, so we'll leave it there. After this first short break, in part 2 we will look at the incident of the death smog of Donora itself and its consequences on the population.
This show is brought to you courtesy of Neil Packer and the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre. Find them online at www.hauntedresearchcentre.com or at 9 to 11 Regent Street, Hinckley, LE10 1AW. Open on Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. for guided tours of the haunted rooms at just £3 per person. Booking is essential at all times, and over 16s only, please, unless accompanied by an adult. The haunted rooms are extremely haunted, and paranormal activity could and has taken place at any time. Some areas and particular objects or items can be quite scary and unnerving. Membership is available for £25 to qualify for selective offers. And why not download the app, available on both iOS and Android, for only $3.99, to keep up to date with what is coming up at the centre.
Both hydrogen fluoride and sulfur dioxide emissions from the US Steel's Donora Zinc Works and its American Steel and Wire plant were common occurrences in the borough of Donora. However, what made the 1948 event even more severe was first the weather phenomenon known as a temperature inversion, which is a situation in which the warmer air above traps pollution in a layer of colder air near the Earth's surface. And secondly, the pollutants themselves, which, whilst in the air mixing with the fog, formed a thick yellowish acrid smog that then, for the next 5 days, hung over the borough. This meant that the sulphuric acid, nitrogen dioxide and fluorine, along with the many other poisonous gases that would normally dispense or disperse into the atmosphere, was then caught in the inversion and accumulated there. That was until the rain came along and ended this weather configuration. It was on the Wednesday of the 27th of October in 1948 when the fog started to build up in the borough of Donora, and by the following day it was already starting to cause coughing along with many other signs of respiratory distress for many of the residents in the community, along with the Monongahela River Valley, with many of the illnesses and eventual deaths being initially attributed to asthma. And An interesting side note here, asthma is a common long-term inflammatory disease of the airways of the lungs, which is characterised by variable and recurring symptoms, reversible airflow obstruction, and easily triggered bronchospasms, with symptoms that include episodes of wheezing, coughing, chest tightening, and shortness of breath. A sudden worsening of asthma symptoms, which is sometimes called an asthma attack or an asthma exacerbation, can occur when allergens, pollen, dust or other particles are inhaled into the lungs, causing the bronchioles to constrict and produce mucus, which then restricts oxygen flow to the alveoli or the air sac. The word asthma itself is from the Greek language, which simply means panting. Asthma is thought to be caused by a combination of genetic and environmental factors, with these environmental factors including exposure to air pollution and allergens. Other potential triggers could include things like medications such as aspirin and beta blockers, which are medications that are predominantly used to manage abnormal heart rhythms. In 2019, asthma affected approximately 262 million people and caused approximately 461,000 deaths, with most of the deaths occurring in the developing world. Asthma often begins in childhood, and although there is no known cure, it can be controlled. The death smog of Donora continued to distribute its thick venomous cloud right up until the Sunday of the 31st of October, just 4 days, which, by that time, 20 residents of the area had already died, and approximately 1/3 to 1/2 of the town's population of 14,000 residents had been struck down with the illness. And just to add more bodies into the hearse, as it were, another 50 of the borough's residents later died of respiratory causes within a month directly after the incident. Two of the heroes to emerge during the 4-day smog, who are definitely worth a special mention, were the Chief John Volk of the Donora Fire Department and his assistant Russell Davis, with both men responding to calls from the Friday night on the 29th until the Sunday night on the 31st, depleting their own storage supply of 800 cubic feet of oxygen in canisters and then borrowing even more from all the other nearby districts. Chief John Volk said, and I quote, "I didn't take any myself. What I did every time I came back to the station was have a little drop of whiskey." But it wasn't just the firefighters who were on call during that Donora smog. In the town there were 8 doctors who belonged to the Donora Medical Association, and much like the firefighters, these doctors had also made house calls during the period of intense smog, with this being the result of patients calling every medic in town in the hope of getting treatment faster. However, it was not until the midday on the Saturday on the 30th of October that the Executive Director of the American Red Cross, Mrs. Cora Vernon, had it set up so that all calls going to the doctors' offices would be switched to the emergency centre being established in the Donora Borough Hall. In some parts of the area, the smog was so intense that driving was virtually impossible and thus abandoned, with those who chose to continue to drive knowing they were taking a big risk, with Assistant Firefighter Russell Davis claiming at the time that, and I quote, "I drove on the left side of the street with my head hanging out of the window, steering only by scraping the curb with my wheels." On the Sunday morning of the 31st of October, a meeting took place between both the operators of the US Steel's Donora Zinc Works and its American Steel and Wire plant and the Burgess, the Mayor of Donora, August Z. Gambon, requesting that both plants temporarily ceased operations. However, the superintendent of the plants, a Mr. L.J. Westhaver, said that the factories had already begun shutting down operations at around 6 a.m. that very morning. And with the rain eventually alleviating the smog, both plants were able to resume normal operations the following day on the Monday of the 1st of November. Researchers who analysed the events at Donora over the years have focused the likely blame, whose emissions have killed almost all the vegetation with a half-mile radius of the plant, on the pollutants from the zinc works. And a Dr. Deborah L. Davis, who was the director of the Centre for Environmental Oncology at the University of Pittsburgh Cancer Institute at the time, pointed to some of the autopsy results showing that the fluorine levels in some of the victims as being in the lethal range, with some of them being as much as 20 times higher than normal. It was reported that the fluorine gas that was generated in the zinc smelting process at the plant became trapped by the stagnant air, which, as a consequence, was the primary cause of the victims' deaths. I did have a look out of pure curiosity to see what the results were for the average amount of fluorine in the human body, and they currently stand at 0.01 milligrams. So no panic there then. Further research was conducted by the American toxicologist and public health researcher Mary Amdur about the effects of the Donora smog, but unfortunately I can't seem to find any copies online as to the results of her findings regarding this case. I can tell you, though, that she was bullied and put under a lot of pressure to withdraw any publication of the results. So much so that when she attempted to present her evidence to the associated findings of the American Industrial Hygiene Association, she was accosted and threatened by two thugs in the elevator at the association's 1954 annual meeting. But being a woman of strong principles, she presented her findings regardless, and good for her, I say. Just to take us nicely into part 3 of this podcast, I'm going to do a potted bio of the two ladies, Dr. Deborah L. Davis and Mary Amdur, who both gave their reports into the consequences of the Donora smog, because let's face it, they deserve some recognition for their work. Deborah Lee Davis, who was born on the 7th of June in 1946, is an American epidemiologist, toxicologist, and the author of several books regarding environmental hazards. She was also the founding director of the Centre of Environmental Oncology at the University of Pittsburgh Cancer Institute and is a former professor of epidemiology at the University of Pittsburgh Graduate School of Public Health. She has served on several governmental and non-governmental organisations conducting research and advocacy into the effects of pesticides, asbestos and wireless radiation on human health, with her main work concentrating on cancers. Deborah Davis is also the founder and president of the Environmental Health Trust, which is a non-profit organisation that argues that mobile devices, Wi-Fi, 5G and other radio frequency systems pose a health risk both to humans and the environment. She has been called a crusader in the fight over cell phone safety and believes that radio frequencies could cause cancer. However, such claims have been challenged by critics as being bereft of credible arguments. Deborah Davis told the New York Times magazine a number of years ago that she had decided to devote herself to cancer research. Mary Ossenhurt-Amdur, who was born on the 18th of February in 1921 and passed away on the 16th of February in 1998, was an American toxicologist and public health researcher who worked primarily on pollution and was charged with studying the effects of the 1948 Donora smog, specifically looking into the effects of inhaling sulfuric acid by experimenting on guinea pigs. Poor guinea pigs. After she was threatened and bullied for her findings on the respiratory effects relating to sulfuric acid and going ahead with the presentation anyway, her funding was pulled and she lost her job at the Harvard School of Public Health. However, undeterred by this setback, she carried on with her research in a different role at Harvard and subsequently at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and the New York University. And despite the early controversy relating to her work, it was used in the creation of standards in air pollution. And not only that, but towards the end of her life, she received numerous awards and accolades. After this second short break, in part 3, we will look at the aftermath and the influence that the Donora smog had on public health.
Fright Nights was established in 1999 as the first company in the world to offer overnight ghost hunt experiences to the general public, pioneering paranormal events since the last century. Fright Nights operate at hundreds of the UK's most haunted and exclusive venues. All events have their own team of experienced paranormal investigators, mediums and psychics. They have a VIP members club for regular returning guests, offering loyalty discounts and exclusive invitation-only events. They can also host private events for your family and friends. You can contact them on 07 852 998 628 or email them at office@frightnights.co.uk or take a look at their website at www.frightnights.co.uk, where you can see the many locations they investigate and learn about them and the opportunities they have available. Hundreds of ghost hunters join Fright Nights every month for the most thrilling ghost hunting experiences they'll never forget. If you haven't been on a ghost hunt before, then why not join them to see what it's all about? Why not visit their social media sites for up-to-date information on all the places they visit and to see what's coming up in the future? They look forward to seeing you all soon. Fright Nights Ghost Hunting Events. Remember, only the original will do.
Preliminary results of a study performed by the Professor of Experimental Medicine, A. Clarence A. Mills of the University of Cincinnati, was released in the December of 1948, with these results showing that the smog had, if the smog had lasted any longer than it did, thousands more Donora residents could have been killed. Sorry about that. And by 1949, just a year after the Donora smog disaster, the total value of the predominantly residential property in the area had declined by nearly 10%. Lawsuits were filed against US Steel, which never acknowledged responsibility for the incident, calling it, and I quote,
"an act of God
And although the steel company did not accept blame, it did reach a settlement in 1951 in which it paid out about $235,000 in compensation, which was stretched out over the 80 victims who had participated in the lawsuit. However, after all legal expenses were factored in, it left them with very little between them. Representatives of American Steel and Wire settled with more than $4.6 million claimed in 130 damaged suits at about 5% of what had originally been sought, noting that the company was prepared to show at trial that the smog had been caused by and I quote,
freak weather condition that somehow trapped over Donora all of the smog coming from the homes, railroads and steamboats, and the exhaust from automobiles, as well as the effluents from its plants.
However, US Steel closed its doors on the US Steel's Donora Zinc Works and its American Steel and Wire plant by 1966. The death smog of Donora in 1948 was one of the prime incidents where the American public recognised that exposure to large amounts of pollution in such a short period of time can result in both injuries and deaths. The event is also often credited for helping to trigger the clean air movement in the United States, whose crowning achievement was the Clean Air Act of 1963, which required the United States Environmental Protection Agency to develop and enforce regulations to protect the public from exposure to hazardous airborne contaminants. On an interesting side note here, the Clean Air Act, or the CAA for short, is the United States' primary federal air quality law, which is intended to reduce and control air pollution nationwide, with it being initially enacted in 1963 and amended many times since, with it being one of the United States' first and most influential modern environmental laws. As with many other major US federal environmental statutes, the Clean Air Act is administered by the US Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA for short, in coordination with state, local and tribal governments, with the EPA developing extensive administrative regulations to carry out the law's mandates and the associated regulatory programs, which are often technical and complex, to implement these regulations. With me so far?
I think so, yes.
Good, because there's more. Other EPA programs create a different requirement for vehicle fuels, industrial facilities and other technologies and activities that impact the air quality. And even newer programs are in place to help tackle other specific problems, which include things like acid rain, ozone layer protection and climate change. The CAA has been challenged in court many times, both by environmental groups seeking more stringent enforcement and by states and utilities seeking greater leeway in its regulations. And although its exact benefits depend on what is counted, the Clean Air Act has actually substantially reduced air pollution and improved the air quality, benefits which the EPA credits with saving trillions of dollars and many thousands of lives each year. Very little was then spoken about regarding the death smog of Donora. That was until 1998, when a historical marker was placed in the town itself to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the incident. Then in 2008, on its 60th anniversary, it was commemorated with memorials for the families of the victims and other educational programs. And on the 20th of October in 2008, the Donora Smog Museum, which is located at an old storefront in the borough, opened its doors, and with it comes the slogan, and I quote,
Clean air started here.
The museum itself features a collection of archival materials documenting the Donora smog of 1948 and an air inversion of smog containing the fluorine that killed 20 people. The museum has now also partnered with the California University of Pennsylvania to develop a digital collection of primary sources that are archived on site. Although Donora was the home to the US Steel's Donora Zinc Works and its American Steel and Wire plant, the event itself is sometimes credited for initiating the clean air movement in the United States, whose crowning achievement was the Clean Air Act of 1963. Today, the population of Donora is now fewer than 6,000 people.
Thank you all for taking the time out to listen to this episode of Mark's Unexplained World. In our next episode, show number 147, we are going to be looking at The Lies of Elizabeth Finch. Elizabeth R. Finch is an American television writer best known for her work on the series such as True Blood and Grey's Anatomy. Finch gained public notoriety for her abrupt resignation from Grey's Anatomy, which was prompted by an investigation into a series of lies that she told regarding her personal and medical history. Finch had altered her appearance to appear sick while working and used stories about her medical diagnosis to gain accommodations at work. Finch also reportedly made allegations that her own brother abused her as a child.
This show was written and researched by myself, Mark Hughes, and proofread and edited by Linda Hughes. The pronunciations of all the names, as usual, was all mine. Round of applause, please. The actors in this episode were Mark Hughes, Linda Hughes and Denise Poolar, with special thanks to Neil Packer and the staff at the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre in Hinckley. And of course, a big thank you to everyone for listening. We never run out of ideas here at the office for Mark's Unexplained World podcast, but if you do know of any other intriguing stories under the Unexplained banner, including ufology, hauntings, disasters and any other sorts of paranormal phenomena, as well as true crime, unsolved crime and missing people, just drop me a direct message and I'll see what I can do. I will also include the name of the person who suggested the idea in the end credits of the podcast, if they're happy for me to do so, of course. And again, just to add, if you are listening to this show on YouTube, please give us a review and a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And if you're listening on any of the other podcast platforms, again, give us a like and a follow. A thank you in advance. Mark's Unexplained World, because there's more to the paranormal than meets the third eye. And remember, guys, keep it real, because being real is better than being perfect. This show and all its contents are covered by basic copyright of Mark the Medium.